Well, before I get into issues and why I'm running and everything else that goes on today, let me just give you a little bit of a background information about myself, because at the end of the day, most of you don't know who I am, and I think that's more important than anything else. I was born in the Soviet Union in the late 1970s. It was a very interesting time, and not in a good sense. In the United States, we get recessions, and rarely we'll get depressions. We don't get to see a collapse of a nation, of an empire. And it was very different in the sense that it wasn't just that people would lose their jobs, it was that you'd go to a store and things would just disappear. And in the United States, people were talking about, oh, I was watching on TV in Moscow, people were standing in line. Well, if you didn't live in Moscow, you didn't get to stand in line. There was just nothing. One year, right before I was about to go, I think it was second or third grade, my mother took me to buy notebooks. Notebooks, pens, pencils, and we didn't find any. In one store, in the other store, in the third store. And I was very embarrassed because I was on my way to school and obviously I have nothing to write on, nothing to write with, nothing to do. And naturally I figured the teacher was going to scream at me because I'm showing up without a notebook. I show up and nobody in the classroom has a notebook, including the teacher. Not a single person in a city of 450,000 people was able to buy a notebook. My mother was teaching in medical school. She would show up with her own light bulbs because they ran out of them, and so if you left them in the classroom, somebody would steal them because there were no light bulbs. The whole city. It wasn't even that you couldn't afford it, even if you could afford something, you just outright could not buy it. On my way to school, I had to cross a bridge, and you couldn't cross it by foot, you had to cross it by bus or by car. Obviously I was too young to drive a car, so I had to take a bus. So progressively the buses would stop running as much as before. And so instead of waiting 5 minutes, it would be half an hour, then it would be an hour, then it would be 3 hours, and after a while I just would not be able to get to school. And every time I would hear the government announce, well, we're adding buses, and every time I would see that the wait would get longer and longer, and half the time I wouldn't even make it to school. So after a while the government decides, you know what, we'll just rent those buses out, so you can rent them, pay whatever fee, and whatever you collect from people, that's how much you earn. And suddenly there was a bus at every stop, you didn't have to wait 2 seconds. There were too many buses, just that nobody was controlling it. But as soon as they allowed some free enterprise, you didn't need any government control. You didn't need government to punish people, to throw people in jail, you didn't need to bribe anyone to get things done. And in the course of this collapse of a nation, outright collapse, that nation doesn't exist anymore. You would see budding trees of liberty. You would see a store that would open, and they would have those things that you wanted. You would see some guy who was allowed to run a small farm, not a commercial farm, but just like something in front of his house, and he would grow some tomatoes, potatoes, whatever it may be, bring them to the market and sell it, and those were great. I mean, it was organic food, perfect, and this is in a nation where the most famous Russian comedian once said, the Soviet Union is a nation of permanently green tomatoes and permanently yellow cucumbers. Because you would go to a government store and that's what you would see. And you kind of start to see what the government failing, and even in the course of that failure, the private enterprise succeeding. But you know, you're little and you kind of figure, you don't pay as much attention to it as at first as you're seeing it. After a few years, we wound up moving to the United States. It was a little over 20 years ago. And coming to the United States, this is from behind the Iron Curtain, so you really know nothing about the United States. All of you know more about Mars and Neptune and all those planets than I know than I knew 20 years ago about the United States. But you're kind of excited about it because you hear great things about the United States. You don't believe all of them because I remember somebody said, you know, in the United States they have washing machines, and my mother said, no way. What is it? Robots that are washing things? No way. So you hear things and, you know, you believe some, you don't believe others, but you kind of have hope because people go one way, but they don't really come back. You know, so you figure it must have worked out pretty well for them. And then, so, actually there was a joke it was famous in Russia. Brezhnev, he was the Secretary General of the Soviet Union. He goes to a family and he knocks on the door at night, and the boy comes out, and the boy says, and he tells the boy, "So, do you like your house?" And the boy says, "Yes." He's like, "Well, I got it for you." And he's like, "Do you have a car?" And the boy says, "Yes, I do. Yes, we do." And Brezhnev goes, "Well, I got it for you." And Brezhnev goes, "Well, do you know who I am?" And the boy is like, "Yeah, you're Uncle Isaac from the United States." So we get to the United States, and it was my mother and I, and that's it. My parents got divorced when I was 3 years old, and we board a plane, and we come from Moscow to New York, and from there we had to go to Dallas. We were actually told to go there. So as the whole plane to the United States is all immigrants, so everyone is really excited. People began clapping and cheering as the plane lands. And then we change our planes, we go to Dallas. We arrive in Dallas, and we come out and we're all excited. We finally arrived in the United States. And we're really happy. And at one point, I see my mother's smile go away, and she goes, "Now what?" Because, seriously, now what? You know how when you arrive somewhere in like Paris or London or wherever you have a hotel over there? Okay, you can't get a hotel in the United States from behind the Iron Curtain. Okay, you're not getting anything. There's no internet in 1991, and even if there were, I'm sure the Soviet Union would forbid it. So we stand there, and now, on the plane ride to the United States, I felt like I speak perfect English because everyone else was an immigrant, and the only thing that they knew how to say is "Coca-Cola, please." So I understood everything the whole ride here, but on the second plane, I kind of got the idea that no, I don't really speak any English, you know? Besides please and yes, you know, there must be more words of English besides that. My mother knows even less English than I do because she studied German. She knew Yiddish from childhood, so when she was in school, she studied German, decided, you know, it's similar. And we're standing there, and somebody comes over, and I later learned that they were from the local Jewish center. They sent them just regular volunteers to help us out, but all I remember is somebody come up and say our last name.
They shut off your cell phones.
And as they said our last name, I kind of got that they're asking if we are who we are, so I said yes. Now, you know how all of you know the word "die" in Russian? That's how I knew the word yes. And they take our bags and they begin to carry them, and my mother turns to me and she goes, "We may be getting kidnapped, but we have no choice." So, surprise, the local Jewish community rented us an apartment. And they brought us like clothes and everything, because you could literally take 2 bags with you per person and $100 a person. My mother also wound up smuggling $600 on top of that, which was completely illegal. But that 100 plus 100 plus 600, $800 is all that we had. After the first couple of months, the local Jewish community kind of helped us out, but it only lasts 3 to 4 months, and after a while, what do we do now? Now, my mother wanted to get a job. In Dallas, however, there's no public transportation. So, because there's no public transportation, you gotta get a car. You're not getting a car on $800, okay? Plus, you know, that money runs out real quick. By the way, the day I arrived in Dallas was Halloween. Now, you come from behind the Iron Curtain, and you get out, and it's like, this is how you see people dressed in the United States. Next day, I come out, and now this is Texas, and I see some people dressed like in cowboy boots and cowboy hats, and I was like, must be that holiday from yesterday that people told me about. So, after 5.5 months, we come to New York, and so first day, my mother pays the rent. We lived in 18th and 48th in Borough Park because my mother spoke Yiddish, so that made sense. And also, it made more sense than Brighton Beach because everyone in Brighton Beach was looking for the same minimum wage job, whereas she was hoping that in Borough Park she could get a job easier. We had $11 left at that point. The first meal that we had in New York were leftovers from the previous tenant who moved out the day before. We had no electricity for about 3 months. We had no furniture. We had for a while. We had, I mean, literally nothing. After about 3 weeks or so, my mother and I are sitting, and it's dark, and my mother goes, "Well, we might be homeless at the end of this month because I don't have the money to pay the rent." Now, we didn't know you could play the system, like people apparently do, because it made sense that if you live in an apartment, you have to pay the rent. It's just common sense. So all of a sudden, it's like a movie or something. Somebody knocks on the door, and it's our neighbor from downstairs, a young Hasidic guy. He goes, "You know, my brother, he needs a babysitter." Actually, no, that's not what he said. He said, "Does your mother want a job?" And I go, "Yes." Because at that point I had learned a little bit of English. And he turns to my mother and he starts speaking Yiddish to my mother, and she turns to me and she says in Russian, you can't imagine how much money they're offering me, $5 an hour." Now, this is $4.25 minimum wage at the time. My mother wasn't even hoping to get more than $4.25. This is 75 cents more. She thought we were wealthy at that point. So she goes and she works. She went from teaching in a medical school to cleaning other people's apartments. You know, she's obviously not going to be able to teach without any knowledge of English. I went to school. It was a little easier for me, but my mother wound up working during the day. She went to school at night, and then after that she would usually look after the elderly people who can't look after themselves at night. So a few years go by. I went to high school, I went to college, I went to law school. I was actually the youngest person, not only in my law school, but in any law school in New Jersey. That's where I went to school. I went to Rutgers. And at one point, when I was about to graduate, I met somebody who came to our school from the Socialist Workers Party, who tried to brainwash the students, and he was talking about how you can't make it in the United States. No matter what you do, you can't make it in the United States. And I've heard that repeatedly from my professors throughout before. I remember when I was a sophomore, I think, in college, my political science professor was talking about how, well, if you're born poor, you'll be poor, and there's nothing you can do. And the problem with poverty, beyond anything else, is not even the lack of money, but the lack of standing in the community, I would say. In that, especially as a child, people look down on you. When the most expensive thing you have is a $12 coat and you're in high school, when every pair of pants that you have is $1 or $2 or less, and everything was bought in the flea market, people look down. You will have a much harder time fitting in than if you get to buy those $80 or $120 jeans and $200 sneakers, and then if everything you have is $12 or less. And I remember sitting there and thinking, I would rather not live if I have to live like that. Because this is just, forget money, it's not the money, it's just the respect that comes from it. And he goes, well, the government should help. And I'm like, I don't care about the government helping. The point is not that the government should help, the point is that I'd like to be a respected person in society. Not, yeah, I'll know what's the story. So, he starts talking about it, and one reason that I rushed through high school and college and law school is that because I wanted to get out of this situation. And I remember him saying, you will never make it, and at one point he goes, well, you probably were born wealthy. I'm like, trust me. And I go, you know, I told him my story, and he says, they're going to get you. It's been 10 years since then. I graduated just about 10 years ago, maybe over 2. And they didn't get me. I don't know who they are, but they failed to get me. I became a lawyer. I started my own law firm when I was 25. It's been active for 7 years now. By the way, I started my law firm, in case you want to know how I got the money, I maxed out my credit cards. Because nobody would lend money to some 25-year-old kid with no income, nothing. I have 4 lawyers in my firm. I have several secretaries, paralegals, and so on. We are very busy. One thing I'll tell you is that in the last 3 years, Barack Obama created fewer jobs than I have. It's true. And all throughout I was really active in politics. I remember the first time that I got involved in politics was in 1993. I was walking in Borough Park on 13th Avenue and 48th, and I see a rally, and I see Rudy Giuliani standing there speaking, and I was very impressed with what he had to say, because beyond anything else, I also didn't like David Dinkins.
Good decision.
Yeah, one of the most jarring things about coming to the United States and really understanding that politics is important, not just in the Soviet Union, but in the United States, is shortly after I came to the United States, the I Love New York company moved to Connecticut because their taxes were too high. Now, if I Love New York doesn't love our taxes, I don't know how any company can stay here. In the 4 years of David Dinkins, 300,000 people left. You know, then Rudy Giuliani comes, and all of a sudden I see squeegee man again. All of a sudden I see the streets are cleaner. All of a sudden I see progress, and you realize that people can make a difference. And I was really involved with Giuliani, Pataki, and you know, several other people. When I was in law school, I wasn't involved so much politically as in you know, some law school affairs. For example, Jews were the largest single demographic in my school. We had a Jewish club that was not active at all. I mean, it didn't exist. Just a name, just to promote the school as having it, but didn't really exist. So I wound up restarting that organization. By the end of the year, we became the most active organization on campus. We actually had a big meeting that the whole school wound up, the whole university, not just the law school, co-sponsoring. I was on the board of Shorefront Y. I am on the board of the New York chapter of the American Jewish Committee. I was involved in all sorts of different organizations. I'm the vice chair of the Brooklyn Republican Party. Joseph and I have been involved. You know, I was this Tea Party. Joseph will back me up on this. Was originally, you know, something that I was very, very much involved in. The first meeting of the Tea Party took place in my office. So Joseph has done a great job. I really give him a tremendous amount of credit, but it was something that early on I was very much involved in. And I was asked over the years several times to run for several positions, assembly, all sorts of things. And I've always said no, but recently it became clear to me that we need to do something to change things, because we have one Democrat after another get arrested. I mean,
or resign.
Something. I mean, there's something in the water or something. I don't know what happened, but it's really unbelievable. You think about it. The last 4 out of 5 Democratic Party chairmen in Brooklyn were in prison. Heads of mafia families don't get arrested that much. I mean, statistically, if you commit murder, your odds of getting imprisoned are 50-50, because half the murders go unsolved. If you become the chairman of the Democratic Party in Brooklyn, it's 80%. And in my seat, in my district, the Senate district, we have Carl Kruger, whose salary was 72 grand a year, who also got some bonus money, but his overall salary was under $100,000 a year. And I remember driving on the belt, and when you drive past Mill Basin, there's like a bridge there, and if you look to the side, there's a big house that stands out. Now, Mill Basin has a lot of big houses. To stand out in Mill Basin, you really have to stand out. And you have this big house that you could see from the highway, and the guy is making like $85,000 a year. And he has 2 Bentleys that are $250,000. I don't know why one Bentley was not enough. I don't have a Bentley. I don't know if they come in pairs. But apparently they do if you're, you know. It was so clear that there was something going on there. I mean, the idea that you can afford this. He didn't have a second job. He didn't have another business. He wasn't independently wealthy before he did this. He used to work as an aide for an assemblyman, making very, very middle-class money. I mean, go home and do the math. Can you afford a car that's, 4.5 times your annual salary, pre-tax salary? Can you afford 2 of those cars? Can you afford to buy a house that used to be owned by the head of the Lucchese mob family? And then put in another $1 million to build up that house, because the house that somebody who ran the mob family is not big enough for you, apparently? It's just such blatant corruption. And beyond that, on ideological issues, you go into Borough Park. The Borough Park is split into 5 different Senate districts. 5 senators have a little Borough Park. You would think that one of them would care about the voters there. You have gay marriage. Every single one of those 5 senators voted for gay marriage. Now, do people in Borough Park support gay marriage?
No.
Okay. Beyond the fact that it's an outrage that they supported it on ideological basis, it's even more of an outrage, the fact that they would ignore their voters. You look at, like, Brighton Beach over there. Do you think a lot of people support gay marriage over there? No. You look at here, Midwood, Flatbush. How many people support it here? And yet, repeatedly, you see politicians representing all these places vote against the interests of their people. It's not even the issue of, I mean, first off, it is the issue of gay marriage, but beyond that, it's complete non-responsiveness. They do absolutely nothing that people actually want in their district. When Lou Fedler, that's the nobody that he mentioned, when Lou Fedler voted to raise our property taxes 18.5%, and we have some of the highest in this district, some of the highest concentration of property owners. And even if you're not a property owner, even if you rent, don't you think that that's part of your rent? 18.5%. He's voted for every other pay raise out there. We have just about universal agreement on school choice in our district. He's opposed to it. At the end of the day, that's the last thing that I want to say. At the end of the day, what a politician has to do is side with the people of his own district. At its most basic. It's not about giving platitudes. It's not about coming here and saying whatever people want to hear. At its most basic, it's about siding with his district. Carl Kruger was engaged in extortion. He was raising millions of dollars because every time somebody wanted to build a condo or open a restaurant, they had to donate money to him. You look at Lou Fidler, the presumptive, he's almost definitely going to be the Democratic Party chairman. I'm sorry, not chairman, but he wanted to be the chairman. The Democratic Party nominee, and he's just the most awfully wrong person for this district on every issue, social, fiscal, on every issue. And they make him the candidate because they figure it doesn't matter what the voters want. Well, I'll tell you what, it does matter. And Democrats have lost every single competitive election in southern Brooklyn over the last couple of years. Every single one. It wasn't just Bob Turner, it was also Michael Grimm before, it was also Nicole Malatakis before, Marty Golden before. If you look at the wider candidates like Bloomberg, like Donovan, Wilson, across the board, southern Brooklyn, when presented a choice, southern Brooklyn went Republican. Bob Turner in the Senate district won 66% of the vote.
Thank you, Rabbi.
2-1. Yes. Yes. And this is why the New York State Senate Committee targeted this particular Senate race. This is why they sent me staff and they sent me posters and they're doing mailers, and Dean Skelos has come here a few times. Dean Skelos is the Senate Majority Leader and the President of the Senate. This is why. This is going to be the most closely contested race of the year in the New York State. And this is the race where we're going to send the final message to the Democratic Party. You don't get to buy 2 Bentleys on $85,000 a year. You don't get to vote against the people of your district. You don't get to put candidates who do not fit the district. You don't tell people that they don't matter. We're going to send that message and we're going to win. Thank you.